Bueno, muchas gracias. Gracias a todos por venir. Muchísimas gracias. And now I will switch into English. Uh, it's a real pleasure for me to welcome Yoav Merav from the University of Hamburg to be here with us. Yoav is the principal investigator of the European Research Council project Hebrew Philosophical Manuscripts as Site of Engagement, HEPMA site, within the framework of which I worked for the last 2 years before coming here to Madrid. He's the author of a much acclaimed book on Themistius translations into Hebrew and Arabic, and of many papers. Um, he works from a unique conceptual and dash methodological perspective, which is really hard to find, an in-between zone, I would say, and hopefully I'm right, between philosophy and manuscript studies. Um, he when I went to Hamburg, I knew nothing about manuscripts at all. So he hired me to work for him, but I ended up being more like a student. And I learned absolutely everything I know about manuscripts thanks to his generosity. Um, he has also been he's the one who introduced me to Joseph Wakar, who is the author I'm working with in my Marie Curie fellowship. So, and he was the last one to read the proposal that I submitted to the Marie Curie. So, this my time here in Madrid is partially thanks to him, and this lecture series is also thanks to him. So, there is uh, no one more than him should be here. So I'm really happy and kind of also proud to be introducing him. So now the stage is all yours.
After this introduction, I think we can just finish here. There was no way I could outdo that. So thank you very much, Lucas, for this generous introduction and the hospitality and everything. We had a lovely few days together in the National Library of Madrid and then the El Escorial. So we also got some things done, which was quite nice. And thank you, everyone, for coming. It is a real pleasure for me to be at such a distinguished place with so many publications that I admire and so many scholars that I learned from. So it's really a great honor for me. And I hope to see what you think about what I say and learn from your questions, and maybe we accomplish something. So I want to first clarify some key terms in the title of my paper. So I want to first, if you bear with me, I will do some theoretical work that is in progress now, and then I will get into some details that I hope reinforce what I'm trying to do, hopefully not undermine what I'm trying to do, and at least makes sense. So first of all, I want to explain what I mean by material causality. So, oh, sorry, I forgot. General knowledge on Hebrew philosophical manuscripts. These are the basic things that everyone should know. And this is what sets this specific tradition apart from other traditions of philosophical manuscripts. Each tradition of philosophical manuscripts should be Arabic, Latin, Greek, Syriac, has its own specific features, which each of these items is different in. So it could be the number, it could be the systematization, the institutionalization, it could be whether or not the tradition is coherent and consistent or not. And if we are talking about Hebrew manuscripts of other fields, other disciplines, then again, the complexion of the details here would change. So what do I mean by material causality? Now, if you know some Aristotle, you understand that I stole the title from him, but I'm not using it in the same way that he does. So in the historiography of philosophy today, there is sort of a tension between two extremes. So this is another continuum. One extreme is the approach which is called rational reconstruction, which is these are people who are looking at texts from the history of philosophy. They find arguments that they are interested in, and then they analyze them for what they can learn from them or from their philosophical merit, with no care about whether or not this was the author's final word, whether or not the author contradicts themselves somewhere else, whether or not this has any historical consequences. No, they are just looking at the arguments. So pure philosophy, no history, no sensitivity for, I would say, context. So that is one approach. Another approach is contextualization, or sometimes people call it to get as close as possible to the intention of the author, meaning that we should know as much as possible about the author, the circumstances, the cultural landscape, the languages, the material production, and so forth, in order to be able to empathize as much as possible with the author and really stand in their shoes. So this is sometimes this comes also in the expense of the philosophical analysis, because whereas the rational reconstruction reduces all this history into arguments, the contextualization sometimes reduces the philosophy to the context. So these are two extremes. Of course, no one I have ever met works in one of these as I presented them. Most scholars are somewhere in the middle. Some are more inclined to rational reconstructions, some are more inclined to contextualization, but these are just extreme points of reference that would be, I would say, would be comfortable as a starting point for discussion. Now, you would think that the natural place to put materiality would be in the context, because this means that where the manuscript was produced, in what language, what script, whether it's institutionalized or not, and so forth. So you would think that when we examine a philosophical work in manuscript, then the materiality would be in the contextualization. But we could do that, but I don't want to do that because, well, I come from philosophy and I don't want to be in a situation where I am reducing the philosophical impact of any aspect of the text. So I'm trying to find a way to put material causality and also other kinds of causality in a place that is not conditioned, but that conditions. So it is not an effect of a context, but it is a creator of one. So I am thinking of looking at things this way, that first we have a theoretical understanding of what is the nature of philosophical object, and then from there we proceed to do the analysis in one of these two extremes. Now, of course, you can say that we can reduce this opinion itself into context, but then the argument will never end. So please bear with me. And here I would place the material cause. And that means, for me, that part of the philosophical understanding of a philosophical text is the manner in which the text appears to us. So matter is consequential. If we would have the same philosophical text and it would appear either in print or in manuscript or online, the reading experience, the way that we approach it would be different, and therefore our philosophical analysis of it would be different. So I want to put materiality into the philosophical explanation and not as a support for the historiography of philosophy. And the same goes for other matters of causality, like the efficient causality. I talked to Lucas about this this morning. The idea that there are heroes, big names, Plato, Aristotle, Ibn Rushd, Maimonides, Wittgenstein, and everything else is auxiliary to the understanding of them. When you see, and this holds for many other cases, when you see how their ideas are transmitted in text, you can understand that the power that these authors have over their texts, over their ideas, is marginal, because most of them have been long dead when all these materials are circulating and what we have from them. So scribes, scholars, translators, any intellectual agent, all of them have a lot of power in shaping the philosophical product. Therefore, if we make them transparent and we only use them as means to arrive at the ideas of the big names, then we are losing actually what happens in the world when these ideas circulate. So I'm saying that the author is not always the most important causal agent in the circulation and digestion of a text. And anyone here who works, for instance, on Aristotle, it's very difficult to know who was Aristotle and what of the Aristotelian corpus we have is Aristotle, is every word there Aristotle, who arranged it, when did it happen? So we do not have Aristotle. And as we will see, we do not have Ibn Rushd either. We have, I don't know, dozens of Ibn Rushds, depending on the manuscript you read. So this kind of post-protagonistic approach, I think, also works well with this. And this is how I approach things. Now, the Arabic-Hebrew continuum. There is no, and the historians of medieval Jewish studies, they know this very well. There is no clear cut between Arabic and Hebrew. It's not a discrete, because within the intellectual activities of Jews in the Arabic lands, there is a lot of text that is in Arabic but is written in Hebrew characters. And I won't get into the ideological aspects of this, whether this is an independent language or not, because the texts that I'm looking at were written by Muslim scholars in Arabic script, and then they were transcribed into Hebrew characters. So the ideology of a separate language simply does not apply. But it does cause us for some sort of material reflection that I will try to show you soon. So one hand, we have the Hebrew characters. On the other hand, we have the idea of the philosophical corpus. So there are a lot of materials that come from the Arabic world that only survive from the Jewish context. And Ibn Rushd is a very, very strong example for that. We would simply not know many things that Ibn Rushd wrote without them surviving either in Hebrew characters or in Hebrew translation, sometimes both, sometimes one of the other. So when we try to study a figure like Ibn Rushd, we have to alternate back and forth from the Arabic and the Hebrew. The Hebrew, of course, is done from the Arabic, but it preserves something that's no longer exists in the Arabic. So we have to alternate. And with an author like Averroes, who has changed his mind so often, and each of his works has different versions, sometimes radically different, then you may think you know something about his opinion on a certain point, but then you find something in the Hebrew that problematizes that. So you cannot be a full scholar of Ibn Rushd without really looking seriously at the Hebrew sources. And it's not only about the preservation of texts. It's even to the point of a specific variant. And I will show you examples for this, because Ibn Rushd can be read in many ways on the material level, and Arabic and Hebrew characters has a lot to do with that. So works, versions of works. Now, when you have that, then of course, the next step is that you have argumentative fragility, because these are philosophical texts. The author is arguing for something. If the text changes, the argument changes. The change could be deliberate, it could be accidental. So you would get, you already have many versions of Ibn Rushd as an author who changed his mind, but you also have many versions of Ibn Rushd as an author who did not change his mind, but his mind is changed through things that happen in the Hebrew by Hebrew scholars. So we have all this range, so we always have to alternate between the Arabic and the Hebrew continuum. And after having said that, we can look into more details. There is another phenomenon that I find very interesting, which are philosophical works that we have in Hebrew that we cannot know for sure where in themselves they stand in the relationship between Arabic and Hebrew, because they start from an Arabic source, but then they become something else, and you cannot pinpoint the moment where this happened. So two very good examples for this. One is the work Muzneh Hayunim. I would say how would we translate it into English? The balance of contemplation or something like that. This is a work that was attributed to several authors in the Middle Ages, attributed to at least 3 translators in the Hebrew tradition. And it is actually some sort of fusion between Bat al-Yawsi on the one hand and the Ikhwan Safa on the other hand. But when you look at the text, you can also see some Jewish elements that could not have been there in the Muslim source. So where does this work stand on this continuum? It really, a dedicated study is needed for that. And if you look, for instance, at the slide over there, you can see that there are some kind of marginal notes. So the one on the top is quite nice. It is by the owner of that. At that time, the owner of the manuscript was a rabbi from the 18th century. And he says, so as you can see, there is no author. We just have the title, we don't know who the author. So the owner says, yeah, I found in another book, which is Neve Shalom, which is a book, a philosophical book from the late Middle Ages, that author quotes from this work and says that the author of this work is Al-Ghazali. Okay, so you see that they did not really know. So he bought this manuscript, he had this text in front of him, and then he needed to go somewhere else to know who the author was. And there is no, and of course, the author is not Al-Ghazali. It is somewhere, some theoretical space between Ikhwan Safa, Bat al-Yawsi, and the Jewish world. And another example is this one. This is called Prolegomena for the aspiring student of metaphysics. It's quite nice because it has a Farabian and Kantian tone to this title, where this is actually some sort of fusion between different parts of Averroes's Tahafut, but it takes a lot of the quotations from Al-Ghazali's Tahafut Falsafa that are embedded in Tahafut, but turns them into uncritical accounts of philosophy and does it over many chapters. So it becomes a dogmatic introduction to metaphysics rather than a polemical work against or for philosophy. And then at a certain point, it ends with some musings that become more and more Jewish. So, and the author is probably Moses ibn Lajis from the middle of the 13th century, but how did this come to be? Where does this stand on the Arabic-Hebrew continuum? It's very difficult to know. It is not based on the other translations, Hebrew translations of Averroes that we have. It is fused in a very intelligent way, but is the Jewish author the one who actually did the fusing, or did this fusion already exist in the Arabic world and he just translated it as it was? We don't know. So again, this is kind of an uncertain space. So the continuum has different ways to be expressed. Now, let's look at a few examples. Let's look at Averroes' Epitome of Logic. This is an early work that Averroes, from the evidence we have, did not revise. Or if he did, it was like very tiny things on a local scale. And all the information that we have on this work comes from the Jewish world. Everything. So we only have two manuscripts, both of them in Hebrew characters. Then we have the translations into Hebrew. Then the Hebrew into Latin translation, which was by far the most read, was also done by a Jewish scholar. So basically, the entire philosophical heritage of this work is preserved only in the Jewish world, which is quite astonishing, but then it has consequences. So look at this, for example. This is Averroes' discussion of the example and why we should not be using it in the logical syllogism. Basically, what Averroes says, that an example does not have universal application, therefore it cannot have scientific value when constructing an argument. And if it was universally applicable, then you wouldn't need it because you would also already have the universal statement. So that's basically what he says, which is quite nice. But then he uses a very interesting example for this, which is saying that since both generated bodies and the celestial sphere, both of them are similar with regards to space occupancy. Therefore, since these are generated, so are the heavens generated. So we take some similarity between them, and from that we construct a general statement. And this would be an argument for the creation of the world based on the createdness of things in the world and their similarity to the celestial bodies. Now, and of course, Averroes says this is a very, very bad argument, because space occupancy is something similar, but it does not mean that it is essential rather than accidental. We cannot use this as an argument. However, if you look at the yellow parts, you would see that there are also in brackets other words. So for instance, space occupancy and then choosing. The first and the second is, you have the expression is space occupancy and alteration, and then is alteration, and then again, space occupying and confused. Now, why did I do this? So if we look at both, the only two manuscripts that we have, both of them are in Arabic characters, you can see that they transcribed the Arabic characters differently. So on the right manuscript, which is the Munich manuscript, you have at-takhayuz, and then at-taghayyur, and then mutakhayiz. So these are terms that at-takhayuz is space occupancy and at-taghayyur is alteration. If you look at the other manuscript in Hebrew characters, you have al-takhayyur with a kha, not with a ha, okay? And then you have al-taghayyur and blank, and then you have mutahayyir and al-mutahayyir. So if you know Arabic, you know that these strings, this string of letters, when you take out their diacritical points, they look exactly the same. And anyone who studies Arabic manuscripts knows that this is a very common phenomenon, that the Arabic scribe, he just assumes that we would be able to fill the dots the right way when we read it. And yeah, I see you smiling. I know that you have seen this many times. So now, if the translator is working with a text in Arabic characters, so they do the transcribing in their mind and the translation. But if the translator is working with a text that was already in Hebrew characters, somebody already made decisions for them regarding how to decipher the text. And what we see here are two separate instances of transcription into Hebrew characters by two different people who understood the strings differently. Okay, so now when we see this, when we go to the Hebrew, many problems become clear that you would never know if you had not looked at the manuscripts. So, for instance, this is a manuscript that preserves, I would say, after the initial translation, the first revision of the Hebrew translation. And as you can see, there are two blanks that are left. And this is sometimes something that you often see in Hebrew manuscripts of philosophical translation when the translator did not know how to translate a word, they left a blank. Okay, and al-takhayuz is a word that is technical kalam terminology, but it does not exist in Aristotelian Arabic discourse. So Averroes is quoting an argument from the Kalam, which he often does. The Hebrew translator does not know this kind of terminology, so they are stuck. So they put here a blank. Now, how do we know that they were stuck? Because some of the Hebrew manuscripts have on the margin the word in Arabic characters, which probably was left there. So it's fil takhayuz. So and you have Ain Resh, which is like abbreviation of Arabic, and then fil takhayuz, which is the expression in the Arabic. So the translator left this on the margin with the hope that somebody eventually comes and completes the work, and they did in different ways. And here's another manuscript that that you see exactly the same thing. Arabic fil takhayuz. Okay, so this is an example of how when we stand in an uncertain place between the Arabic and the Hebrew, different philosophical outcomes emerge. This text, the epitome of the Organon by Ibn Rushd, is part of a very special codex, I think maybe the only of its kind, of a facing Arabic Hebrew text of a philosophy. So if you can see here, so on the right-hand side, you see the Arabic text in Hebrew characters. On the left-hand side, you see the Hebrew translation, and they are facing each other. So this looks like a remarkable intellectual achievement. We know who did it. It was the scholar from Zaragoza, Ezra Gattegno, in the middle of the 14th century. And he was also a scribe of other philosophical works by Ibn Rushd in Hebrew characters. And when he was older, he also was an author of biblical commentaries. So the guy was pretty accomplished intellectual when he got older. But this he does when he is young. And when you look closely, you can see that there is no compatibility between the Arabic text and the Hebrew text. So basically, this is an uncritical copy of Hebrew facing Arabic, and it exposes actually different strands within the textual transmission, even though it tries to give us a unified front. So again, you can see here the words in Hebrew. So at this point, one reviser decided that Tachayuz should be translated as Achizat Makom, which is actually a fantastic translation because it also has the sound of the Arabic, Tachayuz Achiza, and also it explicates that this is occupation of space. So it's a beautiful translation. And then, so you see it's consistent in the Hebrew, but then when you look at the Arabic, it's a complete mess. And this has historical repercussions because we understand that when Ezra was copying this work in Arabic, his Arabic was very weak. He did not do it critically, and he did not even compare between the Arabic and the Hebrew copying. And that has some ramifications that I will not discuss here because it happens also in other works that he copied. And I have a theory about it, but maybe for another time. Okay, so here you can see them in front of each other in exactly the same way. They are just not compatible, but they all fall back into the same strings of letters in Arabic that are interpreted differently. That means that we are creating a lot of philological problems that were not in the original text. We are inflating the philosophical possibilities also, because when people read that text, they think about it and they try to make sense of it and they comment upon it and they come up with explanations, which are all very philosophical and very, I would say, creative, but have nothing to do with the original text. So sometimes mistakes also have positive philosophical consequences. So I'm not being critical here. I'm saying this is one of the vehicles for philosophical creativity. Another example comes from his Epitome of the Physics, and this work has been very well researched in the Arabic tradition, thanks to the works of Josep Puig. And when you look at the Hebrew, knowing what happened in the Arabic, then it complicates it even further. For example, what you see here is two versions of the translation. On the right-hand side, you see the earlier version, which was done by Moshe ibn Tibon about 1250. And on the left-hand side, you see a revision that was done very late. I don't know exactly when, but it for sure, I would say the end of the 14th century, at least, for reasons I would not get into. So this revision is very meticulous because whenever the reviser sees a significant change, so they work with the Arabic model that was used for revision, but they retain the original Hebrew text on the margin. This is good critical philological practice here. Okay, so the yellow that was in the body of the text here is relegated to the margins here, and the new alternative passage is here in green. Now, the nice thing about this passage is that it does not exist anywhere else. It does not exist in any Arabic manuscript. And since we have no reason to doubt that the person is working with authentic Ibn Rushd for many reasons, then we have a small event of self-revision in Averroes that we can only find in the Hebrew tradition. So when we're talking about materials that we can only find in the Hebrew, it's not only works, it's sometimes just paragraphs. And when we reflect on them, we can get a better understanding of Averroes's philosophical thought process. And here again, we see the phenomenon of different interpretations of the same strings of words. For instance, you see here the word al-Baht, which means exploration. Okay. Sorry, yeah, I got carried away with what they were saying. So in the Arabic, you have al-bakht, which means accident. Okay. But the string of letters, if you just move one dot from the ta to the ha, you get bath, which is investigation. So you can see here that in the first version of the translation, the translator was reading bath, and in the second version, the translator was reading bacht. Okay? And an anonymous commentator that we think that is called Shin Halevi because that name appears on the manuscript of this text, but it might not have anything to do with the author, gives a philosophical explanation of why we have why Averroes is talking about exploration here, even though he is not. So again, philosophical creativity from a philological problem. Another example, you see the word muntazi, which is abstracted from, but the string of words can also be read as mutashari, which means begins something. Then we have two explanations. One is that mathematics explores bodies because they lead our way towards matter. And the other said that mathematics explores bodies insofar as they are abstracted from matter, which is the precise Aristotelian thing. And again, Shin Halevi gives a very clever philosophical explanation for the wrong text. And if you look at the manuscripts, you can see again, you see here dorech, which is the Hebrew translation of the term mutashari. So you can see that he was working either with a manuscript in Hebrew characters that had the wrong transcription of letters, or that is how he interpreted the string of letters in the Arabic model that he was using. So you see evidence for that on the page, and when this happens, you know that someone had a problem of understanding, and they recorded it for people to eventually overcome it. And here again, the same root, shin ra ain, okay? And you have the Hebrew yidroch, which is to begin, but it's not a very popular term, so the scribe puts a synonym on the margin, yatril, which is much more, I would say, standard Hebrew at the time. But again, you can see on the left-hand side, the outer margin, you can see the transcriptions of the Arabic letters. And that means that Moshe ibn Tibon had a problem how to handle this root when translating it, or when he thinks that he's translating something that comes from that root. So again, we see things that are happening on this space between the Hebrew and the Arabic. I will give you just two more examples, and I will try to make it a bit quicker. So this is the epitome of the metaphysics, another work that Averroes had heavily revised. And you can see that in the process of revision in the Hebrew, again, you see changes that are based on different readings of Arabic strings. So here you see a jins and a juz that can be easily confused in the Arabic. And here again, jins and jism. Again, very similar string of words. You take out the dots, they could be understood either way. So this is on a small scale, but sometimes things get more dramatic. At the end of the epitome, Averroes talks about the problem of God's knowledge of the particulars and God's responsibility for evil in the world. And this is a theologically charged, of course, discussion. Now, in Rudiger Arnsen's translation, which is a cumulative translation for a synthetic work he did with all the Arabic sources, it's a really, really impressive piece of work. We get this text, which gives you one option that really distances God from the evil in the world in an absolute way. But when you look at the Hebrew manuscripts, you see other options of interpretation. For instance, this is the earliest one, okay, where the translator adds change to God, which was not in the Aronson's translation. And then when he talks about evil that befalls individuals, one should not say that they are not from the deity. So this is the exact opposite position that we saw in the Arabic, because the Arabic, like Aronson's translation of the Arabic had Ibn Rushd says that one can never attach responsibility for evil to the deity. And here the Hebrew says one cannot not attach responsibility for evil to the deity. And both positions make philosophical sense from different perspectives, and also both of them can make theological sense from different perspectives. There is no need to think that there is an error here, because an argument could be made for both cases. And another funny thing is that the third part of the argument, okay, he didn't know what to do. So you see, follows for them that I don't know. So he leaves a gap and goes to the next sentence. And when you go to one revision, you get different opinions. And when you go to another, you get even more different opinions. So when you look at the Arabic tradition, as Aronson understands it, you have one set of views concerning God's responsibility for evil. And when you look at the Hebrew tradition, you see three different positions that are different also from the Arabic one. So this problematizes our understanding of what Ibn Rushd thought about the relationship between God and evil and the world. So this is not a small, like this is important, you know. This is not like the example of the example or the discussion of some esoteric element. This is the heart of philosophical theology, and we have four options in Averroes, and this gets even worse, and this would be my last example. The Middle Commentary on the Metaphysics. This is a work that was considered until recently to be completely lost in the Arabic, but a few years ago, Maroun Awad, he found, I think in Morocco, a manuscript of the Arabic, not of all of it, but of some of it. I would say 70% of it, if I'm correct. And it was published 2 years ago. And it really gave a better understanding of what was going on in the Hebrew tradition. I will skip this part because it's just too much. But what we have, actually, when we look at the Hebrew sources, until recently, we thought that there were two translations. And so the one on the left and the one on the right by Kalonimus and Zarachia. Recently, I discovered, well, I didn't discover, people saw it before me, but I could show that there are portions of the text that were translated independently, perhaps also circulating in the Arabic independently, that have some bearings on what Averroes was saying. And when you project the philological analysis of what is going on in the Hebrew on the philological analysis that Silvia Di Vincenzo did in one of the introductions for the Arabic edition, you can understand here that you have two different moments of Averroes's metaphysics. The early moment in the one in, oh, why does it look like that? Okay, never mind. And my screen, it's very nice. The earlier version, which is in the middle, has Ibn Rushd equate ontologically between God and the existence, and the existence and God. This is a very extreme, borderline pantheistic view, and this is lifted straight from Themistius. Like, it's clear exactly what the source for this is. But when you look at the later version, and they are, again, I got confused. The earlier versions is on the left and the right. The later version is in the middle. You can see that he took a step back and says, God intelligizes the existence, and the existence of the existence is inferior. And also in the end, he says, this is how we should understand Aristotle's opinion, according to which the first intellect apprehends the existence. You don't have it here. It's here on the bottom, but I have it here. I'm sorry for the font. And again, so when you project this on his philosophical development and what we know that happened to him and in his metaphysics over the years, you can say that there was a short-lived moment in Ibn Rushd's career where he was flirting with pantheism. And I think that is quite nice to see. So this is the last example I have for you. I hope that they conveyed my message. There are many, many more of these. You will only find them if you are not trying to produce a critical edition. Because when you're trying to produce a critical edition, and I'm not against critical editions, I'm saying it's a different way of thinking. When you are producing a critical edition, you have to make decisions. You cannot immerse yourselves in all these problems. When you are just having fun with the mess in the manuscripts with no end in sight, then these things float to the surface, and we find things like this on a daily basis. So thank you so much for your attention, and